Imagine the following scene: your 7-year-old son, with bright eyes of wisdom that does not match his age, looks at you and says, with absolute conviction, that it was the maximum leader of the Catholic Church, within the sacred walls of the Vatican. But there is a disturbing detail: he can't remember which pope was. And, as if that were not enough, it describes with scary accuracy the marble halls of the Apostolic Palace, the frescoes in the ceilings, the secret gardens, places he has never seen, except in dreams or memories that should not be his own. This is exactly what happened to the Ramirez family in Morelia, where the smell of newly hosted coffee mixes with the scent of the ancient colonial churches. Maria del Carmen, a teacher at a Catholic school, and Fernando, a master in the art of sculpting altarings to altars, led a simple life, based on unshakable faith. His only son, Joseph, was one child like any other. He prayed his third with his grandmother, played in the courtyard of Adobe's house, and accompanied his parents to Sunday masses. But there was something about him that he said. Small gestures, details that, over time, have become impossible to ignore. Joseph refused to eat meat on Fridays, as if he met a sacred vow. Before meals, he made the sign of the cross in such a solemn way that he seemed to have practiced that ritual for decades. And then there was his obsession with the Vatican images. He spent hours before the religious calendars hanging from the wall, following with his finger the lines of the columns of St. Peter's Basilica, as if he had traveled them countless times. When Maria del Carmen asked the reason for that fascination, the answer was always the same, said with a chilling naturalness: "It looks like I've been there, Mom. It looks home." Until, on the morning of October 13, 2023, everything changed. While the sound of the cathedral bells was echoing around the city, announcing another ordinary day, Maria del Carmen prepared chocolate atoll in the kitchen covered with tiles talavera. It was then that Joseph appeared in the doorway, with such a serious expression that he froze the blood in his vein. The aroma of bougainvilleas entering the window did not seem to reach it. His gaze was distant, as if he saw something beyond that moment. "Mom," he said, with a voice that, despite his tender age, carried the weight of an urgent confession, "I need to tell you something about my other lives." Maria del Carmen dropped the spoon inside the pan. The picking steam of the atoll seemed too thick, suffocating. "Your other lives, my son? What are you talking about?" Jose climbed into one of the carved wooden chairs, settling with a posture that did not match a child. It was as if, at that moment, he was no longer the little Joseph, but someone much older, about to reveal truths kept centuries ago. "Before being me," he began, with a calm that contrasting with his 7 years, "I was a lot of people. First, I was an indigenous in these same mountains, when the gleaming armor came with their crosses. I remember the smell of gunpowder, the prank of the horses, the fear when they forced us to pray in a language we didn't understand. Had imported." The tears ran down Maria del Carmen's face without her avoiding them. It was not the imagination of a boy. It was something much deeper, a memory that transcubed pain, as if those words had been torn from an open wound. "And then?" she asked, feeling that the floor opened under her feet. Jose sighed, as if he carried the burden of many existences. "Then I was born like a Spaniard. I was soldered in the wars of independence. I fought my own brothers, the indigenous people, not knowing why. It was confused, Mother. In one life, I defended freedom, in another, I served the crown that overwhelmed them." He lowered his eyes to his small hands, as if the forgotten battle mark were engraved in them. Then he lifted his face, and his gaze was so intense that Maria del Carmen felt a shiver. "But life before this was different." "Different how, my love?" she asked, in a shaky voice. "I was the Pope, Mother. I lived in such a large palace that marble corridors seemed to have no end. The ceilings were painted by the greatest artists ever. Soft music, and a library where books kept secrets that no one else could know." Maria del Carmen's world was turned. His son, raised within the strictest dogmas of Catholicism, had just confessed that he had already occupied the most sacred place of his own faith. "But there's a strange thing," Joseph continued, with a shadow of anguish in his voice. "As much as I try, I can't remember my name then. I don't know what century I lived. I only know that I carried a weight, as if the future of millions of people depended on my decisions." The following days were a facade of normality. Maria del Carmen was trying to follow the routine: prepare breakfast, take Jose to school, teach at the Catholic school where she worked. But with each look at the sun, the words over the Vatican echoed in his mind like a bell that kept boarder. Joseph, in turn, seemed lighter, as if he had gotten rid of a secret that consumed him. But his comments continued to shake the family. On the morning of a Friday, while spending butter on bread, he released casual, "Mother, why don't we have incense like my pontifical masses?" Maria del Carmen almost choked on the coffee. Pontifical masses, son? Yes, those special ceremonies I celebrated. The incense was different, sweeter, myrrh bench. And I had a ring, a very heavy ring with a huge red stone. Whenever people came to kiss him, it was cold. Fernando, who until then watched everything with skepticism, dropped the newspaper on the table. "Joseph, how do you know these things?" The boy looked at him patiently, as if explaining something obvious. "Because I was the Pope, the Father. The most important of all priests. The palace where I lived was bigger than all the brunette. They had so long halls that it took minutes to cross them, and a library with books so old that they were crumbled to the touch. There were all the mysteries that the church didn't want the world to know." Her voice lowered, almost a whisper, as if she feared that those walls could repeat her words. And at that moment Maria del Carmen and Fernando understood that, true or not, their lives would never be the same. Nadia knew that, between that sea of saints and painted angels, there was a little hidden detail, an almost imperceptible mark, like a secret signature left by those who knew the secrets of those walls too much. Joseph ran his fingers over the image, as if he could feel the relief of secular paint. "Here," whispered, "I left my mark. A tiny point where sunlight beats exactly noon of the summer solstice. Only me and the master who restored the frescoes we knew." Fernando exchanged a look with Maria del Carmen. That was not the delirium of a boy. It was the memory of someone who had stepped on that holy ground not as a visitor, but as a owner. "Joseph." The voice of Maria del Carmen shivered. "How do you know these things?" He looked at them with seriousness that did not belong to his age, as if he carried the weight of centuries on the fragile shoulders. "Because I was there, Mom. Not in dreams. Not in stories. I live there. And now, when I close my eyes, I still smell the incense burning in the chapels on Sundays, I hear the echo of the choir singing the glory in the vaults, close the small fists, as if fighting something invisible. Sometimes I wake up at night because I still hear the voices of the cardinals arguing in the halls. They don't know I'm listening. Or they didn't know." A thick silence fell over the kitchen. Outside, the wind moved on the leaves of the bougainvilleas, but inside that house, the air seemed stopped, as if the time itself had paused to hear. Fernando, pragmatic, tried to cling to logic. Could it be genetic memory? Something you read without realizing? Joseph shook his head categorical. "No, Dad. Genetic memory does not explain how I know the name of the cardinals that betrayed me. Nor how do I recognize the sound of the bells of the basilica when they touch a porridge funeral." His face contracted, as if an ancient pain crossed him. "I remember the weight of the tiara in my head. Of the fear of not being worthy. From the nights he prayed to her knees, asking God to show me the right way." Maria del Carmen took her hands on her face, as if she could contain the tears that threatened to fall. "My God," he murmured. "What if it's true?" Fernando did not answer. Instead, It took the book again and flipped into a page with the portraits of the popes over the centuries. Without hesitation, Joseph pointed to a severe, deep-eyed face and white beard, dressed in the pontifical costumes of the 16th century. "This was me," he said without a doubt. "Pope Julius III. Ruled when Michelangelo finished the Sistine Chapel." Her finger slid to another younger portrait of tormented expression. "And this was my worst enemy. He supplanted me. Stole documents, spread lies. It was because of him that many books were burned. The air got even denser. Because there, on that wooden table for time, was not a fantasizing boy. There was a man, or what was left of him, struggling to be heard through the centuries. We need Dr. Mendoza." Fernando finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse. Tomorrow. Maria del Carmen nodded, but her eyes didn't leave her son. Joseph, in turn, had moved away from the table. Now, with his back to them, he looked out the window, where the last lights of the evening painted the sky of Morelia in gold and purple. Sometimes, he said, so low that he was almost lost in the wind, I miss the sound of sources in the gardens. From the roses that flourished just for me. Of the mornings in which the Vatican belonged only to God and me. And then, as it got awakening from a trance, he turned to them with a shy, almost childish smile. But I like the smell of the hot bread that Mrs. Esperanza does in the morning. And from their tortillas, Mom. That was worse than any revelation. Because for a moment they saw in him not only the echo of a dead pope for centuries, but also the boy he was still and who was somehow stuck between two worlds, without completely belonging to any. It ended, but your mission not. Come back when ready. And then, as if memory transported him back to that sacred moment, Joseph closed his eyes for a long second. When he opened them, it was no longer the eyes of a 7-year-old boy, but those of someone who had seen the other side of the veil, deep, serene, loaded with a truth that no book could contain. They told me they would choose when he returned, he continued, his voice now lower, as if he shared a secret that he even understood himself. That could be born anywhere, in any family. But I chose this one. I chose you. Maria del Carmen took her hand to her chest, as if her son's words were arrows that pierced not only her reason, but something much deeper, the certainty that she had always known. That those nights when he woke up with the muffled cry of baby Joseph, that the times he looked at the wall crucifix with an intensity that did not belong to childhood, that even the way his little hands moved by blessing bread on the table, all were fragments of a much larger story than she could have imagined. Why? Asked Fernando, the hoarse voice, as if the words were going to leave. Why do we? Joseph smiled, and in that smile there was a tenderness that seemed to embrace centuries. Because you needed me as much as I needed you. Mom, you pray every night for God to give you strength, aren't you? And Dad, he turned to Fernando, and for the first time the man felt that he was being seen, not only observed, but understood in his silences, in his doubts, in his nights of insomnia wondering if he had done enough for his family. You carry a fault that is not yours. They think I don't know, but I know. I always knew. Dr. Mendoza, who had hitherto kept the clinical posture of observer, felt a shiver traveling his spine. That was not just memory. It was not just encyclopedic knowledge or a prodigious mind. It was something that challenged all the laws of science he had sworn to follow. And yet there was a boy who spoke of blue-stained glasses that only those who had stepped on the papal rooms knew, who described the loneliness of a pontiff with a precision that hurt, who now looked at his parents with compassion that seemed to transcend time. Joseph, Mendoza interrupted, his voice carefully neutral, though his hands trembled as he held the notebook. You said you came back to teach something about death. What exactly do people need to understand? The boy looked down at the pedron. Has who had organized on the floor a kind of heavenly map, perhaps, or the foundations of something that only he could see? No one dies alone, he replied, simple as that. When we leave, there is always someone waiting on the other side. It is not as they say that death is an end. It is a door. And next there, he hesitated, looking for the words. It's as if everything we love here was saved, intact, just waiting for us to remember. Mendoza felt the weight of that. Not as an abstract concept, but as a tangible truth, something that, if accepted, would change everything. The medicine. The religion. The very way humans face finitude. And how do you prove it? He challenged, though he knew, deep down, that there was no answer that satisfied the logic. Not this time. Joseph did not shake himself. On the contrary, he smiled as if the question was the most natural in the world. I don't need to prove it. I just need to remember. He reached out, and Mendoza, against all his rational formation, let the boy touch his wrist. You know too, Doctor. Deep down, you know. We only forget when it is born again. The silence that followed was so dense that even the wind seemed to stop. Even the cathedral bells, which for centuries marked the hours in Morelia, seemed to be sorry, as if the time itself contained their breath. And then Joseph solved the stones he had organized so carefully one by one as if a temporary altar dismantled. "Come on," he said, getting up and shaking the dust of his hands. "My mother makes the best hot chocolate after dinner. And I think you need a little, doctor." Mendoza followed him, stunned, while Fernando and Maria del Carmen exchanged a look that did not need words. Because suddenly they understood, it didn't matter if the world would believe it. It didn't matter if science would find an explanation or if the church would canonize or condemn it. What mattered was that, in that simple house of Morelia, between the smell of tortillas and the sound of the bells in the distance, they had been chosen to keep the oldest and youngest secret in the world, that love does not know borders, not even those of death. And that sometimes he comes back. Not like a ghost, not as a cheap miracle, but as a 7-year-old who likes hot chocolate and carries the light of all the stars that will already go out. Living reincarnation of a secret that the church buried in centuries of dogma and fear. He is not just the boy who plays in the backyard of his house, who asks for another piece of pan dulce or who cries when he stumbles. He is proof that the soul does not bow to the laws that men have imposed on God. It is the answer that the world expected without knowing that it needed it. When Maria del Carmen heard those words over the phone, her hands trembled so much that she almost dropped the device. "Ay, Dios mío," whispered as the tears ran down his face tanned by Michoacán's sun. She looked at Joseph, who at that moment designed with pencils of color a white man and a golden ring in her hand, the same ring that, according to Vatican's records, Pope Pius XI wore on her finger and mysteriously disappeared from her tomb in 1960. "Mama," said the boy without lifting his eyes from the paper, "Monsignor Alessandro is sad. He thinks the church will not believe him." Maria del Carmen held her chest, as if her heart was to jump from her ribcage. "Why two, Jose? Two creeds that you believe in you?" The boy smiled a smile that did not belong to a 7-year-old, but to someone who had already seen the weight of the world over his shoulders. "It's not about believing, Mama. It's about remembering." And then, with a calm that creeps to the heavens, he added, "They will remember. Because I will show them." Meanwhile, on the other side of the ocean, Monsignor Benedetti had not slept for 3 nights. In his office at the Vatican, surrounded by walls that kept secrets of 2 millennia, he relayed Pope Pius XI notes, the same ones that now confirmed every word of Joseph. If the church knew, he thought, passing his fingers through the spent rosary that the pontiff had given him decades earlier. But fear was a luxury that he could no longer take place. Not when that boy's voice, his voice was still echoing in his ears, "Alessandro, you know it's time." The next morning, a sealed letter with the papal coat was sent to the Cardinal Secretary of State. It was not a request. It was an ultimatum. Spiritual. His Eminence, Benedetti wrote, "I have in my hands irrefutable that reincarnation is not heresy, but a divine truth that our own Holy Father, Pius XI, witnessed before his death. A boy in Mexico carries his memory, his secrets, and a message that can save or destroy the faith of millions. We have no right to silence it." The answer was not long. In less than 48 hours, a Vatican delegation landed in Morelia, composed of theologians, scientists, and a cardinal sent directly by Pope Francis. They came with skepticism in their eyes and crosses in their chest, but when Joseph, without hesitation, described intimate details of the Sistine Chapel that not even the tour guides knew, such as the almost imperceptible crack in the fresco of Adam's creation, caused by an earthquake in 1511, the air in the room was so dense that it seemed possible to cut it with a knife. It was then that Cardinal Lorenzo, an unbreakable man of faith, knelt before the boy. Not for worship, but by reverence for the mystery that revealed it. "Holiness," he murmured, "regardless of the witnesses, what do you want us to do?" Joseph spread his hand, small, with thin fingers, but with an authority that made his knees tremble. "Let the world say that God is not as small as our rules. That love does not end when the body stops." And that here his voice became firmer, as if he carried the weight of all souls who have already cried for answers. The church must stop being afraid of the truth. Silence. A silence so deep that even the wind seemed to arrest his breath. Then Cardinal Lorenzo got up, turned to his companions and, with his voice broken by emotion, ordered, "Prepare the plane. We will take the boy to Rome. La reincarnation is heresy." But here, at this moment, before God and before the world, I confess, I lied. The words echoed through the Vatican halls as a sacred thunder. The air became so dense that even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Joseph, his eyes shining no longer with tears, but with a conviction that only those who carry centuries of real could have, squeezed the envelopes against his chest. It wasn't for militia, he continued, his voice firmly despite his tender age. It was because the world was not ready. The church was not ready. But now, he looked at the cardinals, to the scientists, the millions that observed it through the screens. Now the Holy Spirit is telling us that it is time. Cardinal Lorenzo, pale as the tunic he wore, advanced a step, as if the floor shook under his feet. Santita, he whispered, the title escaping him before he could contain him. Are you aware of what you are saying? Joseph turned to him, and for the first time, it was not an 8-year-old boy looking at the man. He was a pope looking at his successor. Yes, Eminence. I am aware that the truth, when it is finally revealed, does not ask for permission. He extended the letters to Msner Benedetti. Read. Read the words of those that the Church has abandoned for fear. Of those who loved beyond death and were called heretics for it. The hands of Monsignor trembled as they untied the red cord. The first letter fell open, and the yellowish paper revealed a delicate handwriting, almost erased by time. It was dated from 1937, addressed to His Holiness Pius XI by an Italian mother who swore to have recognized her deceased daughter in the eyes of an orphan from Naples. If God is love, she wrote, how can you forbid us to believe that this love doesn't find a way to return? Dr. Mendoza, hitherto skeptical, let his hand to his forehead, as if the weight of evidence crushed him. This is impossible. These letters have been here for almost a century. How could an 8-year-old boy know exactly where they were? Jose did not answer. Instead, he walked to the window he gave to St. Peter's Square, where thousands of people clustered, many of them on their knees, others with their hands up in prayer. He opened the window, and the sound of the crowd broke into the room, a murmur of faith, fear, and hope. Reincarnation is not a threat to faith, Joseph said, now speaking not only to those present, but to the whole humanity. It is proof that God loves us so much that it gives us not one but all the chances of learning to love. He turned, and his eyes met his mother's. Mom, you asked me once why I had to go back. It was no coincidence. It was because the world He recreated that the soul does not die. And that love, his voice embarrassed, but he has recomposed himself. Love is the only thing we really carry with us, life after life. A sacred silence took over the room. Even the cameras seemed to contain the breath. Then Cardinal Lorenzo fell to his knees. And one by one, like waves of a sea driven by a divine wind, the others followed him. I didn't come back talking about reincarnation because it was what they expected of me. Deep down my soul, I knew I was wrong. He knew that God's love is so vast that it is not in one existence. He approached the cameras with those black eyes shining not with the light of this world, but with the certainty of those who have seen the other side. So I came back to scream to the world that death is not the end. To prove that some souls return when there are still promises to fulfill, when love is so great that not even eternity can contain it in one life. The silence in the room was so dense that the blood could be heard in the veins of each person present. The whole world watched in real time to the moment humanity would be forced to rethink everything he thought about life, death, and the invisible thread that unites them. The Cardinal Secretary of State, with tears sulcating his wrinkled face, advanced to Joseph and knelt before the boy. Holy Father, his voice broke like glass, forgive us for doubting. Forgive us to close the hearts to the truth that the Lord has returned to teach us. Joseph reached his small hands over the Cardinal's silver head, with a tenderness that seemed to carry centuries of compassion. There is nothing to forgive, my son. His voice was soft, but echoed like a bell in every soul present there. It was all part of the perfect plan. Humanity needed to be ready to receive this truth. And this moment, his eyes traveled the room, then settled in the camera's lens, as if to see through them each person who watched. This moment is exactly now. A collective breathing seems to have been contained when he declared, the new age of humanity officially began. It was not an ad. It was a certainty. An era in which death will be understood as a passage, not as an end. An era in which love will be recognized as the only truly eternal force, older than the stars, more powerful than time. That night, while Joseph first slept in 66 years in the papal rooms, now with a child's small body, but with the peace of those who have already ruled souls, billions of people around the globe remained agreed, stunned by the weight of what they had witnessed. It was not just proof that consciousness survives the body. It was the confirmation that love, when true, finds impossible ways to return. To finish what was unfinished. To fulfill what was promised. The Pope who returned as a boy had honored his most sacred word, to change the way humanity faces his greatest mystery forever. 5 years have passed since that day that cracked the story in Before and After. Jose Ramirez, now 13, has grown like any Mexican teenager, with pimples, laughter, and the stubbornness typical of age, but with a wisdom in the eyes that no book could teach. The specific details of your life as Pius X had faded, as smoke in the wind, as it should be when the memory of one existence gives way to another. But the essence? Ah, the essence remained intact. Not in facts, but in the certainty that burned in his chest and in millions: love does not die. Just change shape. In Morelia, the Ramirez family found an almost miraculous balance between the ordinary and the divine. Maria del Carmen was still teaching, but now she also climbed international stages to talk about what science was beginning to call transpersonal memory. Fernando continued to sculpine wood, but his altars before simple orders began to adorn interreligious temples that sprouted through Mexico as signs of a renewed faith. Jose went to school like any boy. He complained of math test, played football in the recess, exchanged stickers with his friends. For them, he was just that boy who had already been a pope, a curiosity that did not take the normality of the jokes in the courtyard. But there were afternoons, especially when the sun was lying on the hills of Morelia painting the sky of orange and purple, in which Joseph stopped, looked out to the horizon and was quiet for a long time. At these times, his parents knew, he was remembering without remembering. Not dates or names, but of what no life can erase, the certainty that death is a revolving door, not a wall. "Mommy," said a October afternoon while helping to tidy up the table, "I don't remember the details of when I was a pope. But I remember the sensation." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if seeking the right words in the air. On the other side, everything is made of such a great love that hurts. And this pain. He smiled, almost embarrassed. It's good. Because it means we are never alone. Never. Jose's impact was not limited to the Vatican walls or the hearts of the faithful. The Catholic Church, after years of rigorous investigations, published the encyclical Love Infinitus, a historical document that, for the first time, admitted reincarnation does not contradict God's mercy. Dr. Mendoza, whose initial skepticism had become a scientific obsession, became the largest world authority in cases of past lives. His book The Boy Who Remembered the Vatican became an absolute reference, translated into 47 languages, read by doctors, theologians, and bereaved mothers who, for the first time, dare to wait. Prestige universities opened study centers on the continuity of consciousness. Hospitals started to include spiritual accompaniment in the palliative care protocol. And the letters arrived nonstop from children who spoke of lives they did not live, soldiers who returned from quasi-death experiences, widows who swore to recognize the spouses sent in dreams. Jose responded to all with the same simplicity. I'm not special. I was only the messenger of one truth that the world had forgotten: love is stronger than death. It was December 2022 when Joseph, helping his father to leal a new altarpiece to the local church, stopped suddenly and looked at the starry sky. His voice was no longer that of a child, but he still kept that purity that made adults shut up to hear. Dad, do you know what is the most beautiful thing about it all? Fernando left Goiva aside and looked at his son. What, my son? That now people die less fear. His eyes shone with the reflected starlight. Now they know they are only exchanging home. Not disappearing. Joseph smiled, that smile that, even in a teenage face, still carried the sacred weight of those who have blessed crowds. I think this was the most important mission, Papa. Do not prove that reincarnation exists, but proving that love, paused, as if he chose every syllable, love never needs permission to return. The work was already complete. In the mountains of Morelia, under a starry sky that looked fabric with silver threads, the family that rewritten destinations fell asleep in peace, knowing that there were instruments of something larger than their own lives. And somewhere beyond the constellations, in that luminous garden that Joseph still felt like an echo in memory, where each sheet, each petal, every sigh of the wind radiated his own light, other souls prepared his returns, inspired by the story of the Pope who returned boy to prove that love does not know end. José Ramirez's journey had transcended books and legends. It became, above all, a lighthouse. A lighthouse for those who still seek, on darker nights, the certainty that those we love do not go out, just change shape. That love does not bow before borders, not even before the last of them. And for those who still hesitate, for those who require evidence where faith only fits, Joseph had left as simple as unshakable: love is not proved, one lives. It is not explained, feels. You do not need permission to exist, only open hearts to receive it. If this story has touched something on you, don't keep it just for you. Share with someone who needs to remember that love has no tomb, has no goodbye. Leave it in the comments if you already felt, in an unexpected aroma, in a dream too living, in a heat in your chest without explanation, the presence of those who departed but never really gone. Subscribe to receive more reports that show us how the greatest mysteries in the universe are actually made of the same matter, of the purest things, love and hope. Because, in the end, how Joseph taught us with his life and his return, the only eternity that really matters is this: the infinite ability of the human heart to love beyond time, beyond space, beyond even death itself. And this, no skeptical, no science, no doubt can ever erase.